Yeah, if you just drop my middle name, it's easier to find me.
Oh, okay.
Because
That's
I often do the interviewing rather the other way around. So most of my work shows up in Sunday Times, me asking writers questions.
okay. And we are live, actually.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for coming. With Tia Marie Boatman, wrote a short story in our anthology En passant par Omenana. Naomi is the translator of that short story, and we're gonna talk about your work, Tia, and also the place of speculative fiction in Africa, the place of publishing in Africa, and everything we can talk about in 1 hour. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Where are the rest of the writers?
Yeah, where is the rest of the writers? It's always the same thing. But with the time zones, I think it's quite complicated. I made a mistake the first time I told you the hours. So maybe we have a problem. Anyway, we have you, and it's wonderful. Tia, can you introduce you in a few words for our French public?
My name is Tia Buttermint, and I am an American Brit who lives in South Africa due to my husband. That's where we raised our children. And I am a writer. I've written a few novels, many short stories, especially in YA, but a lot of it is also speculative fiction. And I am a freelance writer for the Sunday Times and a ghost blogger.
Ghost blogger. Ooh.
Yeah, people who don't write their own blog posts.
You said you wrote several short stories and several novels. I saw 2 of them, novels. Am I right? Do you have more?
Yeah, there's another one supposed to be coming out. COVID caused a lot of problems. So I had a novella and 2 novels due to come out. The novella, the publisher died, not actually physically died, but the publishing house. And the other novel was for Amazon Audible, and they had to completely restructure their department, and they no longer wanted what they originally wanted. And so then I was just paid out for that. And now the third one it was supposed to come out like 2 years ago or something, but supposedly it's coming out.
Great. You are writing in different genres. You write for young adults, you write speculative fiction, you write what we call in France mainstream novels. So novel without speculation. I'm thinking about This Day, which is your main novel. Everybody's talking about it, it seems.
Yeah.
You wrote a lot of things in different genres. You have different things to say in the different genres, or you just writing whatever you like? And it seems to me when I read what you write, that there is a shift at a moment where you start by writing mainstream things and then speculative fiction around 2018. Is it right?
Well, I think the novels, unless you're actually requested to write a novel in South Africa, they don't make you much money. I mean, you do it basically because you have a story that you would like to tell and you tell it. And like with the YA fiction, most of it was for Funza, which is a NPO in South Africa. There's not a lot of fiction for South African youth that's written for South African youth. You know, a lot of even the textbooks sometimes and the little stories the children learn on might come from Oxford, so the seasons are wrong. most of the people are white. They're not telling their stories with their reality. And so they hire South African writers to write South African stories. And sometimes we have free reign. Sometimes we're told that you need to get certain themes in there. So one story I had to, for example, talk about different uses of animals and different problems with animals and positives. So there was like, I had dog fighting in it, an assistant animal, but most people in South Africa are aware of those for blind, and I used one for autism, and some corral type of ways that they use animals. So sometimes, yeah, or sexuality. I had South Africa didn't have a trans story yet in their YA, so I was asked to please write one for that, things like that. And then for the speculative fiction, it's fun and it can be beautiful and literary, even though it's genre.
Yeah, of course.
And I like the freedom to explore. And to be crass, the speculative fiction magazines still often pay, where the literary ones don't. And I appreciate the exposure I got in my 20s and early 30s, but I have a family. I need to earn a living.
Naomi? Oh, pardon. Oh, sorry. When I say pardon, it means sorry. My bad.
Hello. Hi, my name is Naomi Kodo, and I'm a literary and general translator, specialized in speculative fiction as well as African literatures in general, and more specialized in West African literature. I translated 5 short stories in the anthology En passant par Omenana, which is my first publication. And as such, after working on your story, Tia, I'm very proud and honored to meet you. It was really, it's a lot for me. So forgive me if I'm a little tensed.
You have a question, Naomi. Put you on the grader. No?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear.
I said, do you have a question for Tia, Naomi? You hear me?
Question, yeah. Sorry. Well, what really stood out to me in the Band of Water was how you wrote this entire world. Like, it really encompasses a lot of issues, a lot of current issues, well, issues that look current, and transposes them quite effortlessly, I think. And it really felt like a world to explore in its own. So yeah, I really like that world building, and I was wondering if you have written more in that universe in particular, or if you plan to if you plan to.
No, there wasn't plans to write it. It's a quite well-known South African editor person had challenged writers to imagine a future world where Africa had never been colonized. And so that I was responding to that challenge. And I enjoy working with water and the fact that they think like every droplet connects us. It's been in somebody for you and then me and our ancestors, and we're all connected by water and that connection. And that's something that I've brought up in quite a lot of stories, but that actual world was basically thinking, well, if Africa was never colonized, certain resources would have never been available. And without slavery, a lot of superpowers wouldn't have been able to do what they had done. And so it would have created a very, very different world landscape. And Africa could have used their own resources to build themselves a much better future.
Okay. Wow. That's that makes sense. I really like the idea of the water drops connecting all of us. So you said you use that in a lot of your stories, in a lot of other stories, that idea of connection. Could you give us a few examples of that? Like,
well, this day is the biggest example, and it's not a spoiler. It opens with centered around two parents that are grieving.
Okay.
And so what the mother does every morning is she goes down to the beach and she writes a letter to her son, and she has the tides timed so that the water will then take the words and eat them, basically, and send them back to her child.
Wow, that's
And
beautiful.
she's a gardener, and they've put the ashes into their garden of their child, and to keep the cycle going of connection. And so it's a huge theme throughout the whole book, which is why the cover is basically water droplets.
Okay. And how did you come up with this this idea of water connecting us?
Well, I grew up in a very small rural coastal town in Oregon. So I've always been near the ocean and the water, and it rains a lot in that side of Oregon. And then also my grandfather was a professor at University of Portland, and I forget the exact name, but it's a type of very small microbiology. And so he was always talking about the things that live in water and how they connect to us. So I've always found that quite fascinating. And our bodies are mostly water, which is quite interesting. We're just like big water sacks.
It is. It is.
Am I allowed to ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
Because South Africa, has 11 official languages. So a lot of writers I know are actually, they make their money and survive by translating, which I'm always fascinated by. And I recently, like, for example, interviewed Mikael Hines. I don't know if I said his name right. And his book even talks about the art of translation, because you don't translate directly, do you? You have to make it sing in the language you're turning it into, correct?
Yeah. I mean, it's always complicated because, well, it's complex, of course, but it depends a lot on the author, on their style, and on our own style of writing, because that influences how we're going to render it. And each language has its own particularities and its own ways of saying things. So it's always kind of difficult to gauge sometimes, but when you practice a lot of your language, when you practice it a lot, and when you read a lot of different styles that people write in, you get along and you end up knowing which way you should translate this particular author or this particular text.
And what do you do about the rhythm? Because often even prose, and people always think rhythm in poetry, but actually even prose, there's a certain beat or where the pauses are, and how do you keep that rhythm in the translation, especially when words, like a small word might be a big word, or a big word is a small word?
Yeah, it can be difficult, but usually it's just about balance, I think. If you cannot keep the rhythm at the same place in the sentence, for example, you must find something else, whether it be the same rhythm applied to several sentences, for example, or the same rhythm applied to a choice of words that will have, for example, 3 syllables instead of the 2 that you would have used it if there weren't that rhythm. And I think that this kind of things can help recreate a rhythm, even if it's not exactly in the same space. It helps because the rhythm will be here anyway. it will be a bit bigger, or it will be a bit smaller, but it will still be here, for example.
It's quite an artistic trick.
Yeah. It is. And well, that idea of balance is also, that is something that I was taught in my studies, is that when you translate a text, especially when it's a short one, otherwise it's a bit difficult to apply to like a whole novel, for example. But when you think that there is some place in the text that where you couldn't render the rhythm, or there was something a bit missing, but you couldn't put it there because of the limitations of your language, you just mark a minus, a sign, and then when you could add something more, you add a plus sign, and at the end you you just have to like calculate whether or not whether or not there's balance in that text. So it's you have to mix and match a lot of these little I don't know, little tips so to make it work in the end. And when you read it at the end, if you feel the text flowing, if you feel something going on and something moving while you say it, then you know that it's a good one.
Okay.
Rhythm is the most difficult thing in translation, especially when you translate poetry.
Yes. Poetry is very difficult because it's more condensed, I think, than prose, but
and it's not at all the same rhythms, the same rhymes and everything. It's a mess. Every time I make one, it takes me a lot of time.
How long would it take to translate?
No, go.
Oh, sorry.
Go on. I'm sorry. I don't hear you very well, and I think you don't hear me very well too.
No, I was just curious how long it takes to translate a story for the anthology. I mean, I imagine quite a lot of work.
Yeah, it can take quite. Well, it depends. It depends on the stories, because some are longer or shorter. So of course that's something. But it's. I think it was I spent about a week on each novel, I think, which is a week translating, for the whole day. So about 8 hours a day. It was about a week of translating a short story. But it really depends on the affinity you have with the story. Some of them with the story and with the style of the author, and with the text in itself, because some of them were more difficult for me to translate. It didn't really take more or less time, but it took a bit more. And some of them really flowed. So I don't really know how to how to explain that. I think it's just the style of the author that comes into synchronizes in some sort of way with the style of the translator. So I think that's how some short stories are more difficult or to translate for some of us.
And I think we must say a word about how we worked on the translation, because I let you choose the short stories you wanted to translate. And
yeah.
and I think it's very important, because you can choose what talks to you. And I chose Sandy, which is our third translator, not here today. Then I chose the short stories he liked the most, and he could. We can work on something we choose ourselves, and it's very different. That having something somebody said, you translate this. No,
Yeah.
I think it's an important part of the process. I think
it is, because then you actually translate what you want to translate and what you like. So, but you knew already that which ones I was going to pick, which is quite
that's
cool.
My work. That's my job.
Yeah, Patrick sent me the short stories that we were supposed to pick, and told me to give him the titles that I wanted to translate. And when I sent the first, I sent back was, I think it was The Ben of Water, and he was like, "Of course, I knew it." So yeah, it's really something that talks to you. So when it does, it just does. I like water too. I think it's fascinating. Every stories that I found with water, or that have the element of water in it, I really like them, which is why I also like the first story I translated, the one by Bad Bus, because there was a lot of rain, and I love rain too. So I thought it was really it helped create an atmosphere that helped me translate the story. Even if the atmosphere was in the story, it helped me get into it. So I think that happens a lot with water in text. So it was a good choice.
It was a good team, because I like translating about the sun, the hotness, the dust. Good team.
See?
Tia, it was the first time you were translated in French. Were you translated in other languages before?
Yes, I've been translated into Afrikaans, and another story was translated into Zulu.
Yeah.
Obviously, I had no part in the translators. Professionals were hired to do that by Funza. So yeah, one of them was the animal, dogs and goats one, and then the other one was it was a story called Lost Words, or the Word Graveyard, where words that go to die, because modern times we're losing languages, even unspoken languages such as sign language. We are rapidly losing different types of sign languages, which are beautiful languages. So that was the theme of that story, of a young boy who didn't want to learn his home language, who just wanted to speak English.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating idea, I think.
Well, it's something that I feel a bit funny saying it, since I'm only proficient in English. I did get very good at one point at a form of sign language used in the United States, but I'm incredibly rusty now. But in my school district, they had declared it un-American to teach other languages. So like my grade 1 teacher was teaching us Spanish, and she was forced to stop. Parents were quite outraged. And, my husband grew up learning a second language. And when we were going around Europe and stuff, he would pick up words just as we were traveling and know how to ask where the bathroom is and things. And that's one thing I've emphasized to my children. You must learn other languages, because it opens up things in your brain and it changes the way you see things. And I meet children in South Africa who are refusing to speak their parents' home language. It's crushing to the parents. And I'm like, you have such a gift and such an opportunity. Don't waste it. I mean, my high school eventually was forced to start teaching us French in the last couple of years. But starting a language at 16 it's late. And your tongue has already lost things, the flexibility to make these sounds, where if you start at 4, 5, you have such opportunities, and it keeps things in your brain open.
It does. Well, I have got a personal example, but my first language is French, and every other language I I speak English and Spanish, but I learned in school. And depending on what kind of media I consume, I couldn't explain myself sometimes in French because I was used to some terminology or the possibility of speaking about some things in another language. It's mainly in English, for example, but when I want to talk about my feelings, it's difficult to do so in French because I mostly hear people talking about their feelings in English, which is, I don't know why, I don't know how it happened, but but it is true that, well, that's a specific example, but it's true that some things you just can't say in a language, which is very important, which is why it's very important to, I think, to learn different languages, because there are things that do not exist in the language. It's quite interesting to see that it's not only the word, but the concept that doesn't exist. And I really like that idea. So maybe that's why I'm a translator.
Okay. I interrupt everybody all the time, so I mark the pause every time now. Let's talk about speculative fiction, Tia. How did you discover it?
As a writer or as a reader?
Both.
Because I think children's literature allows you to be speculative fiction. It's just you're allowed to dream, where as adults it sort of gets shoved more to the side, although that has changed. And I think the last 15, 20 years where it's less, probably because of the Marvel movies, which is a bit sad to say, but I think there's truth, where people don't feel they have to hide the more, they used to consider that more geek culture, where now, and the Lord of the Ring movies, I think, also resurged a love for dreaming in different ways. And I like the fact that the speculative fiction seems to allow you to play with themes that might be more controversial in literature, which seems very strange, but you get to play around with things that I guess other readers aren't ready to hear or not ready to hear in a more blunt context, I suppose. And maybe people get less defensive about certain issues if it's put into speculative fiction, because it's that world and not their world where they have ties to and defend it more, perhaps. But yeah, I like the ability to explore these things in a new setting and where we have slightly different rules.
It's interesting that you're talking about new settings, because you're someone who changed your life setting in the USA to go to another completely different, I assume, life setting in South Africa. Did it change something? And what? Because I suppose, yes, in the way you write, in the way you read, in the way you see things in general.
Yeah, I've spent most of my adulthood outside the United States, and it is, I mean, the United States is so big. California's population is bigger than Canada's, from my understanding. And also the US focuses in a lot. So just getting information, I mean, we had the internet when I was in high school, but still, I mean, as my son said, you know, people would load up a page, go make themselves some coffee and come back and maybe the page is coming in. I mean, it isn't like now where if you have a question, you can just immediately, instantly, you know, 5 seconds, you've got the answer. So going to Europe after coming to South Africa and seeing all the newspapers and the different opinions and all the different countries, it was nice to see people do things and learn about things where it's so hard to get that information in the United States. And things like concepts like free healthcare, at one point, I don't know what it's like now because they're no longer in the UK. It's been a while. But at one point, my sister and I compared in what I was paying for UK taxes towards the NHS compared to what she was paying for insurance and then the top-up fees. I was saving loads of money and getting better care, actually. So yeah, I think it definitely changes your perspective. And also, I think sometimes to be more focused on the horror story or to watch something that you write become a reality. I mean, that's what's happening with, I have a short story called An American Refugee. And again, we were challenged to try to think of the future just a few years, maybe 10, 15 years in advance. And so I tried that. And watching certain US politics and climate, it was kind of like I'd written it as a warning, and now it's coming true, which is horrifying.
I think that happens with a lot of stories. I mean, we are seeing a whole lot of things happening in the world that are completely like dystopian, and it's interesting in the literature point of view, but it's really, really scary, and well, that's the state of the world, I guess. But I think it's interesting to, when you already write speculative fiction, to compare what you wrote with what is happening. And so I was wondering whether you see some tendencies that are happening in real life and using them in your stories, or if they're really different because you don't really go in the same direction. I don't know if my question is clear.
Well, I mean, if you're asking, do I take things from real life and put them in fiction? Well, very much. I mean, my shorter work generally is more political than my longer work, or at least was in the past, I suppose, or less overtly, obviously political, although it is. And I try to make it so it isn't quite certain what time of year it's put in, but like this book that's supposed to be coming out whenever, certain policies while I was writing it just became, and like, how could she not be upset by what's happening? It just, when the children were being separated by their parents at such a large scale in the United States, when children were crossing over. And I was like, she could not ignore this. It would be too much, especially because I had made the character, her background modeled much like mine, where she's white appearing but has Hispanic ancestry, and her father had hidden it, where in my mother's case it was a bit more complicated, not so much of a deliberate hiding, but and exploring this and going, oh, if I was as dark as my grandmother, I'd be one of the people that they're saying go home.
Yeah. Okay.
Even if you are home.
That's always the problem with people telling you to go home.
Yeah. Well, I've heard France has some issues like America in that regard, and yes, Britain definitely did. And I think that also gets echoed in my work because I am so pale that people, I get the white privilege, and when having to go through immigration, both in the UK and the immigration processes and in South Africa, there's a lot of paperwork and it's really hectic. And one of the most common things said to me by other white people when they hear about this is, yeah, but why do you have to do that? And why do you, it's like there was supposed to be some white get out of jail that wasn't supposed to be, those are for the, those immigrants. And, then get very cheeky and go, so who are those immigrants? And some people start saying things. I'm like, you're basically talking about my grandmother and my great grandmother. That's the people you're talking about. You just think, oh, because I'm pale, that I should have just been let in. And it's absolutely rubbish.
It is. There are a lot of problems also about this in France, but
in Belgium too.
I mean, I think in every country, but well.
Yeah, it's a strange tendency of the world, all this closing nationalism and so on. And it has never been so easy to learn about other people, to go in other countries, to travel and everything. And in the same time, there is that opening and that closing. It's really schizophrenic, should I say it?
Yeah. Almost, yeah.
Africa, I mean, it's easier for me with my American and British passport to travel around Africa than it is for a lot of people in African countries because of the way the visa system works, which doesn't seem right at all. Not that I want extra paperwork in my life. I'm more advocating for less for everybody. And even South Africa with their xenophobia that's happening. I mean, when I'm in a shop, nobody harasses me, but I know some Zimbabwean people to the point where they've actually sent their families home and they're just working here. They're so scared, and I don't have to live with that fear. Nobody's going to come after my children. It's you can't ignore these things in your writing, I don't think. I mean, people say, oh, my writing isn't political, and then what are they saying? They're saying, oh, they have the privilege to ignore. That is a political choice.
Yeah. I do think that it isn't possible to not to use politics and put politics into your writing, because you're always talking about something in a certain way. And even if you don't want to talk about like directly about some issues, it's still gonna come back in. So well, maybe it's easier to just talk about it, to find a way to put it into, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the challenge is to try to paint it rather than be blunt about it, like, and preach to your reader is the trick. And yeah, I don't always get it right. Sometimes it's too subtle and too like, autism in girls is not well diagnosed, it's often missed. And I did this short story where it was an undiagnosed autistic character, and it's so subtle. And then the thing at the beginning got dropped off, the little intro to it to explain about the story. So it's basically, what do they call it? Coding. Like, unless you know to look for it, you might miss what the whole purpose of this character. I mean, it's still a fun story, and it's a funny story and for the kids, but it's almost too subtle, where I was trying to show between the different short stories. Sometimes I try to show different angles of an issue. Like, here's somebody on the spectrum that has these traits, and there's somebody on the spectrum that has those traits, and to try to paint a broader picture. But sometimes you're too subtle, and other times you're too blunt. It's hard to get the thing right.
It is. I was wondering whether you were, would you say that in The Band of Water, would you say that you were leaning more on the subtle or on the blunt side? Because I think you talked quite directly about some things, some issues about immigration.
Yeah, I did worry that it might be a little too heavy-handed. I think I was quite cross with the story because at that point, the United States, I mean, it was before COVID, but the United States was making some very bold and choices I didn't agree with. And then South Africa was having problems as well. And so I think it may have been a little bit too blunt. Because I mean, that's basically the one character. She's guiding people as you do. How do we get across? I mean, it's happening in Africa right now with the wars. Here, pay me money, I'll get you through. Some people are legitimate, some people are just scam artists. So yeah, it does seem a bit heavy-handed, I guess.
Well, maybe it's just about it is the theme of the story after all, but I don't know. Do you think you would have rendered it differently, more with more subtlety in this theme? I don't think that it's. Sorry, please go on.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I think part of it was maybe if I had more words, you can do things a bit more gently. I think I was trying to cram quite a large idea into only 6,000 words, which I think was also part of it. Then again, I don't know. I think it's natural to be very critical of your writing, but then again, I'm not sure how with those themes you get too subtle, because it is what it is. I mean, these are the issues, and yeah, I mean, it's a story that harkens back to the old Romeo and Juliet theme, the forbidden star-crossed lovers not meant to be together. And that's really supposed to be the heart of the story, while wearing all the world, but a different world on top of them. But how do you handle the different languages, the borders, the crossings, how we monitor? It's something that affects people's lives daily, many people.
And you do have to talk about it anyway. So, but yeah, would you? Is that a word that you would want to develop? Like, do you want to write more about that word you built?
I don't know, because it's tricky. Trying to keep track of all the different governments and building all that. I'd have to I remember that I made so many notes for that story. I think it had more notes than some of my novels that will live in a drawer indefinitely. Trying to figure out what would be the national language, what would be, what people speaking, because if Africa hadn't been colonized, the English probably would not have been the dominant language. And looking back at how people were exploring and taking over other cultures, I mean, France and Spain may have had the upper hand, or Portugal. And then in Africa, even the dynamics there would have been hugely altered if there hadn't been colonization. So, I mean, I was making guesses on populations of who speaks what, but would those have been realistic? I don't know. I mean, it's kind of hard to play the what if game.
It doesn't have to be that realistic.
I did like the characters. I mean, despite their passion and rage for their actual jobs and occupations, and they were both under intense, I mean, the one is intense family, the other one is living a very lonely life. And the fact that they could still be tender with each other despite everything going on, because not everybody can set their feelings to the side when they're dealing with it. It all comes out. And I did like their tenderness despite the anger. So that was fun to sit with, but I don't know about revisiting the world. Whew, that'd be a lot of Excel sheets.
But there are so many stories to tell. Okay, I'm done trying to influence you into writing more about that. But
Good try.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I stepped back from fiction. I'm dipping my toes back in. I recently got asked to write a very specific tale and like trying to re-exercise my fiction muscles. I mean, when COVID hit, I mean, just watching everything, like 2019 was supposed to be my year and all these things were happening. It was like, okay, I'm coming out. And then everything kind of crumbled. And then my dad died, who was like my biggest fan. And I think, and then our family entered huge financial uncertainty. My husband's company was sort of paying him, maybe, no. And then we get official letters that he wasn't going to get paid anymore. And I just threw myself into trying to make money, which is where the ghost blogging came in. And now that things have stabilized, trying to find my way back into fiction. But now we have this AI to deal with.
Yeah.
What a time. What a time.
It's really hard right now on account of that, well, yeah, of the AI and such. So what are your thoughts about how things are going to go?
I don't know how the editors are going to cope. And they're not coping right now. I mean, a lot of my work, I used to help run Short Story Day Africa, and I've also helped with the Single Shark Stories. I was the managing editor for their publication for a couple of years. And so I've gone through my share of slush piles. And one of the issues that's happening with these AI is, someone just pumps out and submits. So people are hitting record level submissions within their first day of the submission window opening. And it's human beings that have to sift through these stories. And some people are getting well enough with the AI that maybe the first 2 or 3 pages are actually good. And then it crumbles. But then that takes the editor that much longer, where with human written stories, often by the first page, they can tell whether, and go through the pile faster. So they're getting record submissions, having to close windows shorter before the writers who are writing in the traditional manner can get their stories in, and then having to sift through this massive pile. And that's a human job, at least at this point. And then when it's not, you start wondering, what is the point? And the way the AI works, it's scraping from older work, and that is a problem, because even I am my storytelling, as you learn things and change, your writing changes, and the times that you're living in have changed. I mean, just look at the US, they're already bringing AIs into the US healthcare, and you're thinking, well, until the late 90s, studies weren't required to be done on women, even for women medication. Even female rats weren't used. And you're drawing upon old data that's going to now have those biases from the past built into it. And that goes for racial, gender, everything. And so we're going to bring the sins of our past with us into our future, even more than we already do, which is, and I'm worried then all our stories just going to get stuck.
I certainly hope not. I hope that someone, well, a lot of someone's actually take up the reins and put a stop to it all, because what's the point if we don't, if it doesn't die down, these AI trends, what's the point in writing?
Should we stop it, or should we learn to use it wisely?
How can you use it wisely? I think
I don't know.
I don't know if it's possible, actually, because some
reader critique AI if they had one, like, sometimes you come at a crossroads of your story and go, oh, would it be better this way or would it be better that way? You want like a writer best friend feedback person. If they had someone who's like, oh, this paragraph is really boring, I could use it AI like that to be like, yeah, okay, I see you've worked out some issues here, but this isn't serving the story. Just remove these pages. But
isn't that the work of the editor? Oh,
Which if you get published by a place that we're privileged to be matched up, otherwise it's making friends that try to act as your, and you do favors for each other and buy each other bottles of alcohol as thank you. But you know, people have lives and they get busy. So, and sometimes you're just not sure which way should I go. But yeah, the AI. Oof. I mean, I don't think it's going to go away, and I'm grateful for things like spell check, especially since my work requires me to write sometimes in American English, sometimes in British English, and it's nice to be able to set that spell checker and make sure. But yeah, if we just keep recycling, we do recycle the same stories. They say we only tell 7 stories, but I think people keep bringing new things to it, because we keep progressing as societies and we keep changing. So our stories and the style we write in change.
Yeah.
I don't know if AI can do that.
I don't think it can. And well, the thing is, as long as it is not the story that the AI wants to write, it doesn't matter. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's like right now it's used by people to submit, for example, to a story that would pass all the how can I say this? It is used by people to shorten their writing times, for example, or their editing times, and just submit something without having to think about it. But the point in us writing is that we have something to say, we have something to transmit, we have something to show. So if it's just if it means that if using AI means that it just takes from stories that were written before and mixes it up a bit and just gives it back, it doesn't have any originality, it doesn't have any personality to it, if you catch my meaning.
And I worry because, I mean, one of my jobs is reviewing books for the Sunday Times, and I get sent a lot of books, and you start seeing the literary trends and the formulas that publishers are asking people to write for, to the point where there's one certain book where I can almost spot it by the cover. By the first chapter, I know, okay, so it's always, you know, someone died, the woman goes back to her hometown, she discovers letters, and she's going to meet her love there, and she's going to discover all this stuff about, and it gets boring to the point where I feel bad, but you know, by the 20th one you've read, even if it's really well written, it's hard to like it anymore. And people keep buying this, and I'm going, oh, great, if we have AIs pumping these out. I mean, I cannot, I think people are going to get bored of reading. And it's already, I mean, you can see even with movies, people are going, oh, you know, it was fun when the Marvel movies started, but now it seems to be like, here's the next one. And people are kind of like, those are nice stories, but we can have some different ones. So I am worried we're just going to get very bored. I mean, maybe that will bring in a new art form. I don't know, maybe spoken word poetry or things more in, arts that are harder to copy.
Probably, yes.
Mhm.
We all go to the theater more.
A theater revival actually seems to be a good consequence to all this.
I had a friend. Yeah? Sorry?
So go ahead.
Go ahead. I had a friend who said about AI, the only thing is the AI are not a problem because artists will find a way. That's what they always do, actually. And that's maybe the solution. You talk about new forms of art. Maybe it's the the real solution, because if the form is new, it can't be something from the past. We carry on like a burden, like a Sisyphus.
Mhm.
I think maybe. Am I clear or not at all?
I guess we're going to find out.
Yeah.
Probably. Let's hope so.
But yeah, I mean, it is interesting when just even applying to other jobs and things. I often send, when they want samples, I send samples from like 2019 or something, so that it's like, this was not AI written, here's proof, because it wasn't there yet. And I know that with book covers, it's becoming a huge problem because people are being accused of using AI. And even in the ghost blogging, I mean, my son also does ghost blogging, and he is on the spectrum, and it's a very matter-of-fact, dry style. And some of these plagiarism trackers track him as being an AI. And it's like, well, no, it's just very, very it's just how they write. How do you prove you're not an AI?
That is a good question.
We're going to have to film ourselves while we work.
Yeah, and even then we have the things like deepfake that exist. So I think at some point we're just not going to know, not going to be able to tell. So I don't know. How would you write a story about that? I think it's interesting when you see such a difficult issue, because we know nothing about what is going to happen. So how do you take this issue, this kind of issues, and write something about it, like make something plausible out of it? I always wondered that in speculative fiction in general, but
yeah, I mean, I guess you pick ways of how it could end up like this, it could end up like that. I mean, it's many, many different styles of stories, and some of them are correct and some of them will not be. I mean, I guess it was just like, yeah, like with the American Refugee, I mean, it was if we keep going down this path, it could end up like this, but I could have done it differently. And unfortunately, I had hoped that humanity was going to wake up and use their hearts, and not enough have yet. So I guess it's the same thing with AI. There's nightmare scenarios, and there are positive scenarios where we use it for good. I don't know if that always happens, though.
probably not. Well, we'll see if more of them happen in due time, I think.
And speaking about time, I'm afraid we must end this conversation. Thank you very much, Tia, for coming. I'm going to speak in French. Thank you, Naomi. I'm sorry. I'm going to speak in French 2 seconds to make some advertising. Donc, la nouvelle, La courbe de l'eau, traduite par Naomi, de Tia-Marie Bautement, se trouve dans le recueil En passant par Omenana, disponible sur le site des éditions Les Vagabonds du Rêve. Vous allez sur Les Vagabonds du Rêve, vous tapez En passant par Omenana et vous pouvez commander l'anthologie au prix de 18 € plus des frais de port. En France, ils sont ridicules, je pense. Achetez-en 1000.
De préférence, merci.
Chacun. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Tia, for coming.
Okay. Lovely to meet you both.
Happy to meet you too.